I'm happy to facilitate, or if someone else wants to. Okay, awesome. Oh, it'll help if I opened up the document. All right, so we started the recording. Reminder to everyone, please sign in. Status updates.
I don't have a lot to share. I'm still working on my 2 issues. It will take me some time, but I feel that I know what to do. So that's
it. Yeah. I had planned to work on some of the life cycle stuff today and tomorrow. I don't know how it's going to work out. My house is currently leaking, so I'm sort of dealing with that. So I don't really know what my timeline is for getting back to doing the one ticket that has my face on it. But I may do it as a distraction if there's some time in between. I may start kind of messing with it. So we'll see.
Picturing you spending 2 days running around with buckets.
It's way worse. I was on a roof today. It's still snowing. It started snowing again. It's the worst. So yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't have that much to add. I've just been working on the platform this past week. Sorry, y'all.
Similar unexciting update from my side.
Mostly the same.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Micah. I was gonna say mostly the same on my end. I've been working on non-CMB things and still have several of those to get done before I can devote more time to the project.
But soon you'll have more time, right?
Theoretically, yeah.
Yay!
Either way.
We're very happy.
For right now, though, there's still no backfill for my current role. So it's going to be hard to get more time until there's someone else to do it.
I'm working on a draft of the changes to the spec for the Windows SID stuff, and then starting on an implementation of that already. Kind of being juggled along with other priority, but it's definitely the top of 2 items that I'm working on.
Any other updates? If not, we can move on to our release planning. I don't know if we talked about this as a team yet, but we were thinking of cutting a patch. I guess it would be lifecycle 0.10.3 to include Jesse's fix for the issue, I guess, like treating a mounted directory as
Symlinks,
symlink as a directory.
Figuring out symlinks better in the mounting platform stuff in that area of the code. Yeah, it's not a huge deal, but I figured it would have been a good exercise to get a patch out for it. But I'm really okay with it if it waits until next week or whatever. I'm not in a rush.
If we're going to cut a patch, are there other bug fixes we want to get in? I know there was the layer size issue that was fixed in GGCR. Is that something that we would like to try to get in?
See if they cut a release yet.
We can ask them to cut a release too if we need to.
Yeah, I think we would still be waiting on that, but that might be good.
I'll ping Matt more. In the past, when we've asked them to cut a release for something, they've been really responsive. So.
Do we have anything else in the milestone that's a bug that we've already tackled?
Let's take a look at the, oh, here I can share my screen. Share the whole thing. Just go, oh, this one. So we had, so this is the one we just talked about. And this says bug, but this is really, this is a feature. Can I note that one? And then the other one was this confusing bash error codes, which I have yet to make my spec PR. That probably will take some
Are
time.
any of the closed issues bugs?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Just to patch them over if they are. Oh no, doesn't look like it.
But if we were to get those two bugs, that sounds, I mean, that seems like a pretty good delivery of value.
I agree. I feel like the other one that came up recently that I haven't really looked into yet was sort of Windows cache images. I don't know if that would be a quick fix. If it is, maybe we could try to roll that into.
Oh, I put that on the discussion for today. Yeah, depending on how hard that is, that might be a good one.
Those images all have to use like a special base image. I don't know. There may be some things there. I don't know. Like, is it really a quick fix? Maybe we'll, I guess the discussion we'll talk about it. I have no idea.
Micah contributed some functionality to image util that should make this, I think, fairly straightforward. Is sort of what build packages use. In some ways, it's a little funny because we only use cache images for remote images, and they're not really runnable. We just sort of use them as like a convenient blob store. So the fact that it's not a Windows-based image in some ways shouldn't matter, but I do see the point that like people expect to be able to pull it, and the way the Windows daemon works, it won't pull it. So it probably is good for the same reasons we did this with build packages to make it pullable.
These will be probably considerably larger images because of the necessary cruft, but Windows, I think, but I don't know.
I did throw a, and sorry if this is getting ahead of it, if we want to talk about it separately, but there's a kind of a out of left field option where we could try out a hybrid image, one that would be pullable, the same exact image, which would be pullable by Linux daemon or a Windows daemon. It involves symlinking things inside of the image to make the Windows things be where they need to be and the Linux directories be where they need to be, but it'd be the same content. But but I'm also not certain if there's any value in that, if these images would ever be used by, if these caches would be useful for two different lifecycle runs.
It may set us up for like ARM compatibility as well, right? Like, because I assume this similar things we're doing for Windows, we need to create an ARM image for the same like convenience reasons. So investigating a hybrid may not be a bad idea here.
Yeah, I'd definitely say I don't understand the problem too thoroughly to give much of a support for it, but definitely talk through the prototype if anyone's interested.
My knee-jerk reaction is we should do the simple thing now and make it Windows versus Linux, and then we can come back to the handling multiples at the same time problem later in a way that could be applied consistently across all of our types of images, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's definitely possible to Jesse's concern, to make an image that would be pullable by an ARM or a x64 daemon. That would be pretty simple without going all the way into the Windows image.
Right. Yeah, I think I agree. That makes sense to me. Do the simplest thing now that we know will work, and then if we want to get fancy later, for convenience reasons, we can.
I think there was a question: is this simple enough to qualify for trying to tackle in this milestone? Do we feel like that's feasible?
you're the one who wrote the image util stuff that we're planning on using. Hey, how hard? What are we talking about here? Is it going to be fairly straightforward, do you think?
It is changing the interface, the constructors for, is that true? That we'd have to change the constructors for the image util images to set the OS type?
I found that issue that you made where you mentioned that as a change that we could make, but I didn't know what the status of that was.
I technically think there are setters for the OS on images for now.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could change it after the fact, but I guess I didn't see the error enough to know. Maybe it's failing prior to when we could even call a setter on it. But yeah, it does feel like if we do end up changing the constructor, maybe that's significant enough to maybe put it out of scope for this timeline. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I'm kind of.
I still need to look
Come
at
on.
it to have an opinion, but my guess would be that because we already make Windows build package images, and this is basically the same thing, that whatever we need already exists in image util, and we would just have to change a couple lines in the main of wherever we're constructing the cache image.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah, we're using the empty image helper, which is the cause of the problem here, I think, right? So if we just potentially have a path for Windows to do whatever we do for build packages that pack does, perhaps we can branch it in lifecycle for now or commit it in image util to take in a platform or something.
Yeah, I bet it is going to be super similar to what pack does for that, for those build packages. I'll see if I can dig up the code. But do we feel like that's worth trying to squeeze into the milestone?
Maybe it's worth just measuring it, and if it's a small effort, then we'll say, sure, let's squeeze it in. And if it's anything more than small, seems fine to defer it. Is that something, Mike, do you have the bandwidth to look into it, or we can also put it up for whoever has time?
It's a good question. The higher priorities for me right now are the Windows SID change and the dropping privileges for like priv.runAs. And my gut feeling is that SIDs will land first. The privilege stuff, because it is probably cleaner to make based on that, will land after that. And then probably maybe the cache images might be lower priority, but that's my take on it. If y'all feel differently, I'd be all ears.
My mind, it matters like how much work it is. I feel like even small things, even if they're objectively less impactful, makes sense to bump them to the top of the queue. Right.
Yeah.
I think about it sort of like how I would prioritize improving my apartment. Like maybe painting is the most high value thing, but if there's a dirty dish to pick up, I might as well pick it up.
Yeah. And in that sense too, do we know the main use case? And I forget my ignorance too. Y'all have the main use case for these cache images? It's not like KPAC or anything, right?
Pack implementing it, I believe, right? Like they're trying to support using images instead of volumes from the pack interface. Lifecycle already does this, but pack does not.
Okay.
Yeah, I think KPAC uses this, but probably doesn't matter. Wow. I don't know how many KPAC users are then going and pulling the cache images. I feel like it's probably not something people interact with this directly, but in pack, because you're specifically passing the image with a flag, people are more inclined to be like, let me look at that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, then if y'all would feel comfortable prioritizing this over the Windows SID stuff, even if, I mean, it is likely to be small or infeasible, in which case I would probably put it down. But yeah, I might take a look at this first then before the Windows SID stuff. I mean, I'll probably put the spec change in for the Windows SID, let that work its way through before I start implementing the Windows SID stuff. I can take a whack at this thing. Feel free to sign me on that if you want. Or I guess I can assign myself.
All right. We have it. Well, thank you, Micah. I guess we took a winding road, but I think we covered release planning, and I think we actually also covered our needs discussion because that was this thing. So great. And standing item RFCs that relate to implementation, I believe we've discussed them all. Great. And now we have some new topics.
Yeah, I think that I added both of them, but the first one relates to something that Jesse and I discussed last week, and then we had a conversation over Slack. So I guess it will be pretty quick. Jesse, do you want to talk about it, or should I?
Oh, I mean, I don't have super strong opinions here. I've just gotten the habit of doing lots of squashing and rebasing like in PRs. Just it doesn't affect the reviewers the same way it does in this group here. But I don't mind just doing like fix up commits, but then I was thinking, oh, maybe we can just squash those all when they get merged. But Stephen brought up some points on like outside collaborators or whatever, and they may not feel comfortable with that, and that makes sense to me. So I don't really have a strong opinion here. I just know the history. If you get a long running PR, it's going to be a lot of commits into the main line, and so so it was just something I wanted to at least bring up. But if we don't really bothered about that, then I'm not bothered either.
Personally, I don't mind like squashing a few commits together. But when I do a review to someone, it's hard. I mean, you need to like take the both commits, hashes, and just compare both of them. While if you just, push commit, then you can just pick the last commit that you reviewed, and then you'll see all the changes since.
Yeah, I can definitely change my habits to just like push fix ups, and then after it's all approved, maybe squash it just so it's nice before it goes in, just on my own accord. But like that's fine if we don't want to adopt any sort of things there. I just noticed I had a different workflow than some of the folks, so just wanted to make sure we align. So I'm cool.
I've been pro squashing for years, and Stephen has been.
I used to be super
He has a really
against it.
strong opinion on this front. I don't know how like widely shared that concern is in other open source communities. Like if there are other big projects that squash things, I don't know if we need to worry that contributors would feel uncomfortable about it if there's evidence that they don't, but I haven't actually looked into how common it is.
Yeah, I would totally be fine if we enabled it on GitHub, and then so I had the squash button like there just for convenience. But understanding that I wouldn't push it on anything, but that wasn't my PR. But that would just save me some annoyance of squashing locally and then having to push it after someone has reviewed it. Because I think it feels nicer to have done all the fix up commits to your point, Yale, as far as like for review purposes, and then a big squash button from GitHub means that I don't have to do anything special on my end, and it doesn't look like I changed everything after you approved it, which is also sort of a concern.
Yeah, I like this idea. What happens in this case, by the way, to the commit messages? if you have like a squash button, can you edit the commit?
Yeah, when you hit the squash button, it dumps all the individual commit messages, just kind of like it does if you were to do a rebase locally. It dumps them all into the thing, and then you have a chance to like edit it there.
Okay.
So I usually just copy my PR description and paste it in there, and then like go from there.
So like you're doing it locally, but it will appear differently on GitHub.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because then that's the only commit that makes it into the main line, and you still have to remember to do the DCO stuff, I guess, because otherwise, I guess the CI would fail maybe on name. Like, so there's some automation stuff that I don't exactly know how it's going to look if we just enabled the squash button, but I'd be the guinea pig there if we wanted to try it.
Cool. Any other ideas?
Just I personally have gone away from squashing and force pushing recently because of a mistake Emily pointed out to me, which is that if you reference another issue from another repo in your commit message or in your issue message, PR message, it makes a bunch of spam on that separate issue. Just a bug in GitHub that gets exacerbated by force pushing. And it wouldn't be a problem if you squash at the end.
I've taken the opposite. Well, not the opposite, a different tactic where I used to always reference things in my commit messages, but I've started only, like I was putting the text of the PR.
That makes sense, yeah.
Anything else? Or we can move to the next item. I guess we can move next one. So it's another thing that I put last week. And Emily, I think that you were not here, or you were only in part of the meeting. It relates to the issue that I'm working on. So as part of my issues, we're trying, when we're using the build, cache, and launch flags, so when at the beginning of every build process, we're going to like set them all as false and not keep the previous settings from, keep the setting from the previous build. And then, is it clear enough, or should I explain more about it?
I'm familiar with the issue.
Okay, great.
But what's the question exactly?
And then my question was, so why do we even save these 3 flags in our images? Can we just throw them away? And because it looks like during the analyze phase, we'll set them all to false, and then we'll have the build phase. The build pack will need to set them back to either true or false. During the export, we'll save the layers based on the settings that the build pack made, and then we'll from some reason we'll save them for the next round, but again in the next build we'll set them all to false again. So after I started working on the actual code, I saw that during both the restore and the analyze phase, we're actually reading these flags and we're using them in order to decide what layers we need for our current build. But I was wondering whether we actually need these flags, or can't we just see, okay, these are the layers that I have from my previous build. Do I need to use them or not?
They do matter.
Okay. I had the feeling that you'll say. Can you please explain?
One of the examples where that I think it's sort of obvious why it creates problems, even though it's not obvious when you're thinking about the process coming into it, is in like, take for example, a layer that's build true, launch true, and cache false. So it's in the image, but we don't have a copy of it in the cache. We never restore layers from the image. So the only thing that we could restore there is the layer metadata. But because the layer is needed at build time, like it's not enough to restore the metadata. You actually want the contents of the layer. So in that case, we don't restore the metadata at all. So the Buildpack knows it needs to provide the layer again. Because otherwise you can imagine the Buildpack looking at the layer metadata and being like, ah, this is exactly the layer I wanted. I'm not going to make a new one, but it's not there. So it really does need to make a new one.
What do you mean by it's not there? I mean, we saved it as part of the image. And I mean, since the launch was true, so we
It's not
saved it
in the build container, right? So if the layer contains, if it's build true, it means it's providing something that like a downstream build pack needs. So maybe you know, a tool that another build pack uses. So even if that layer is in the previous image, because it's also needed at launch, the same tools needed at launch, it's not satisfying the requirements of the downstream build pack if it's not actually on disk at build time.
So you're saying that during the analyze phase, we'll read the metadata of this layer. And maybe I'm missing something. So with this metadata, the build pack, how will the build pack use this metadata?
So right now, if we were in this case, we don't restore anything because we think the only thing we could give the build pack is useless. Like just the metadata isn't useful. We don't want to, if there's no chance that the build pack could avoid doing work based on something we restored, we don't want to restore anything.
So when will we restore the metadata?
In this case, we would never restore the metadata.
Yeah, but is there a case, I mean, I guess there is, that we will restore the metadata from a layer?
It would be like if it's launch true, build false, cache false, we'll restore only the metadata because the build pack could reuse the layer, decide to reuse the layer without needing a local copy.
Oh, now
or if it's launch true, build true, cache true, then we can restore the metadata and the contents.
From the cache.
From the cache. If it's in the cache. If there's no copy in the cache, because it's you deleted your cache or something, we'll restore nothing. So if it's launch only, you can get just the metadata. For any other type of layer, you will either get both the contents and the metadata or nothing. We never restore just the metadata if the contents are needed.
And the reason a build, so if build equals true, all these flags are very confusing, I'm sorry. If launch is true, build is true, cache is false. Let's leave cache aside. So if launch is true, build is true, then in the previous build, we saved the layer in the app image, right? But the layer was used by one of the next build packs, right, in the chain. So why do we even save it in the app image?
If it was build true, launch false, we wouldn't save it in the app image. It's like the launch true says whether we save it in the app image, and the build true false says whether another build pack needs it. But you could have a tool that's needed in both places.
And my canonical example is like a Docker credential helper or something, right? Where like you have a binary that it provides, and some build packs may need to pull images, and then maybe your runtime image needs to use that same helper. It is weird that, I mean, it is super confusing, but now that Emily's kind of explained some of it, I'm like, okay, maybe now I sort of understand it, but I think we have to have the metadata so that we know that it gets restored at launch time, right? But we don't want to restore it during build time in this case, even though build is true, because cache is false.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't get it. When launch is true, it means that we want to save the layer in the app image, right?
Mhm.
Now, when build is true, it means that one of the next build packs would like to use this layer. Is it the layer? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another example might be something like Ruby, a layer that contains Ruby. Like
Okay.
I need Ruby at runtime to run my Ruby app. A downstream build pack that executes bundler also needs Ruby to be available. So that would be a build true, launch true layer. But like launch true, build false example might be something like the JRE. Like I use the JDK at build time. I don't need a JRE at build time. I only need it in the image. So on the next build, my Java build pack, it doesn't need a copy of the JRE. It just needs enough information to know whether it should reuse the existing copy.
I don't get why. Maybe I should continue thinking about your Ruby build, example. So when launch is true, it means that we're going to put it in the app image. But you're saying that if build was true, so in the next build, we won't get the metadata of this layer because we're actually needing the data itself.
We
But
won't get just the metadata.
Yeah, if cache is false, cache is false.
Yeah.
I think we should make a table, like a grid, so we can see all the because I think there's
Your example,
many
Emily, if
possibilities.
I don't understand why would we need to save it in the app image, but we want to restore it in the next build.
because they explicitly said cache false, right?
No, but there are some cases. Okay, so if only launch is true, so we're saving it in the app image, and then in the next build we can actually use this metadata. How would we use this metadata? Like, is there any example for this? Maybe
We
Let's go
used
back to the
export, right? We reuse the layers from the previous app image
Yeah,
completely, right?
we won't create another layer because it will be exactly the same.
Yeah.
Okay, great. But now we're talking about a case that launch is true, build is true. And so we're going to save it in the app image, but we won't be able to restore the metadata in the next build. And I'm not sure I understand it because
it's to make the life of the build pack a little bit easier. So let's do just the launch true, for example. And let's do the concrete like JRE example. So the first build, I'm a JRE build pack. I put a JRE to layer, and in the layer metadata, I say what version of the JRE it is. It gets put in the final app image. Great. It's available at runtime. On the next build, the analyzer gives me the metadata from the previous layer. So I go read the metadata and I say, what version of the JRE was that? And if the version is still the version I want, I say, okay, I'm going to do nothing. In a case where it's now, we've moved from JRE to Ruby, so I'm the Ruby build pack. If I do the first build, contribute Ruby, write the version in the metadata, it gets stored on the image, and then let's do something the lifecycle doesn't do right now, but what we would do if we didn't save this information. So let's say now the next run, the analyzer gives me that layer metadata. As a Ruby build pack, I might go look at it and say, oh, it's the version I want. I should do nothing. But that would break downstream builds because there's no Ruby on disk at this point. So the bundler build pack is going to fail. And yes, a build pack could, in addition to reading the layer metadata, go check if the layer exists, but it's putting more responsibility on the build pack, where as the lifecycle, we already knew up front that the build pack couldn't avoid work, because if it's needed at build time and we don't have it, it's impossible for the build pack to avoid doing the work. So instead of making it more complicated for the build pack to ask the do I need to do the work question, we just answer it for you. Like, yes, you need to recreate the layer.
So this is like build equals true means I need it in the build time because one of the next build packs will actually need it.
Yeah.
Okay. So a follow-up. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No. Go ahead. Sorry.
Maybe a follow-up question. Why do we only get the metadata and not the full layer?
The only place we get full layers from is the cache.
But why is that? Why don't we read it from the app image?
Because it's generally more expensive to read things from the image. Especially if this was a daemon image, it would be more expensive. So we use the cache to be a place where we can say, these are things that are available to restore. And a lot of times, in most platforms, the most performant way to do that is a volume. Like, yes, if you had a cache image, it's probably equivalent, but if it's a volume, it's not. And we want to be explicit about where we're willing to pay the penalty of fetching a layer from.
And back to my original question, so this is why we actually need the flags, because we want to know whether we should read the metadata or not, or the actual data or not.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, it kind of means that we can save only the build flag. Doesn't make sense. Or it's just too complicated to think about all these like options.
I don't see any good reason to delete information.
No. I'm just thinking. I mean, on whether we need. Okay, never mind.
Like
It's how you
theoretically,
build, it's cache too, right? Like it's kind of weird. Like you still have to know cache because
Oh yeah.
it's like a different step. But you almost want to know like should you even ignore this metadata piece at all?
But you can read a cache. So you can read a cache. You can see whether you have this layer, and then if you have this layer, it means that cache was true in the previous build. And you see whether you have this metadata in your app image, so you know whether launch was true in the previous build. So you only need to know whether build is true or false to actually, but probably it's easier to just have the 3 flags and like, okay.
I think that's true for launch. Like if it's in the image, it was launched true.
Yeah.
Like every layer that ends up in an image in its types is going to say it launched true, because that's the only way it ends up there. Like that's just always true. So in some ways it's meaningless data, although I do like its explicitness.
Okay.
Cache layer is similar to a build layer in that a cache layer is always available at build time, but we might not make its contents, we might not expose its contents to downstream build packs. So like in our Ruby example, if it's a build layer, Ruby ends up on the path and then downstream build pack can use it. In a cache layer, that's not true, but the build pack itself might have a runtime dependency on a cache layer. So in some ways, so we do the same thing for cache layers as we do for build layers for a slightly less obvious reason. both cache true and build true layers we treat as something that the build pack wants to be available at build time.
That relationship between build and cache is confusing because I can't think of too many reasons why I would do build true and cache false. Like, because in our example, you would want the rubies to be able to be pulled from cache next time, so that you don't have to do that work. And I guess if that layer isn't available in cache, we don't write the metadata, right? Or like we don't write the layer tunnel, so that it has to redo it. So it's kind of like as if nothing existed to begin with.
Yeah, I can think of reasons I might want cache true and build false. The opposite doesn't come up very often. And all the examples I could come up with are pretty contrived. It's like every run, generate a random layer or something crazy like that, right? It's like, I never want it back, but other build packs need to use it.
Yeah, that's the part that always is really confusing to think about because that's what makes this hard.
Actually, I do have one real world example. The CA certs build pack takes certificates from a binding and creates a directory that has a bunch of correctly named symlinks pointing to certificates and sets an environment variable. And that needs to be build true because you want that environment variable to be set for downstream build packs. But we don't actually want to recover this data. We only want to do this on the next build if again, a binding is applied at build time. So that's a real world example of build true, cache false.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
But then again, in this case, you just want to find the layer in the cache. And so theoretically, again, you only need, I think so, you only need to save the build flag.
You need, because we won't restore just metadata if it's cache true, we need the cache flag because the cache could have disappeared for other reasons than it was cache false to begin with.
Yeah. Okay. But then again, if the cache data is not there, then okay, it's not there. So why should I care whether it was true or false?
Because if it was true, you don't want to restore just the metadata. But if it was false and build was false, go ahead, we'll restore just the metadata.
Oh, is there a case to restore only the metadata from the cache?
There's a case restore only the metadata from the launch image, but both build and cache must be false.
Wait, can you say it again?
There's exactly one case where only metadata is good enough. And that's launch true, build false, cache false. Because the build pack can decide to avoid rebuilding the layer, so it gets reused, but the layer isn't guaranteed to be unnecessary to be present on disk during the build.
But my question is whether there is a case where you will restore only the metadata from the cache, not from the app image.
Not from the cache.
I'm sorry?
No, we would never restore just the metadata from the cache.
Okay, so again, again, we're talking only theoretically. So if anyone else has other questions, so go ahead. If I can see that the layer exists in the cache and I see that it exists in the app image, then I know for sure what was the value of the flags? Oh,
that's true. But if it's only in the app image, you don't know.
I don't know whether cache was true or false. Now I got it. Okay, cool. So we'll just keep the 3 flags. Wow, it's so confusing. Sorry.
Yeah, those names don't help either. I'm not really sure what to name them, but like build, launch, and cache are not. Yeah, it's not immediately apparent like when those are going to be useful.
Yeah, and even by reading the spec, it's like, wait, what? But thank you, Emily. Nali, I see that you have a question, so sorry.
Oh, no. I was trying to capture this in a table that we could refer to later. but I'm not sure if I might have to go back and watch the recording to make sure I got all the examples.
I
But I
learned
think
a
that-
lot.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily.
All right. I was doing a really bad job explaining it. This is the
Oh,
kind of
no.
situation where in an office I get out a whiteboard, but I find the barrier to doing that really kind of hard in a remote call.
You should buy a tablet like Javier. God.
I know someone who set up the like OBS and that's their camera, and then they have like, and then they like green screened it so they can write on like Microsoft or whatever, and like it just shows up on top of their image like a whiteboard or whatever.
I should buy some gadgets.
Now, if you want, we can review it together, the table that you create. And
I think
Great.
we've exhausted our topics, right? I was curious. We don't have to do this now because we're, I don't know, 12 minutes left. But I was curious to continue the discussion that we were sort of having on different ways we can approach validating our TOML, right? With like API version structs or some sort of validator service. Like I think there were sort of competing proposals. And it might be worth just sort of like, I don't know, vaguely sketching it out so that we can form an opinion. You know, Jesse, you shared something. That's
Yeah, I
right.
had some gist somewhere that I don't know where it is anymore, but I'm sure I can find it. Yeah, I don't have strong opinions there. I'm definitely not a Go expert on like organization. I just know like interfaces look like the right path, like just from an external consumer of like, you know, a Buildpack package, like exposing those structs, I think will eventually cause us some pain, like, you know, as lifecycle does stuff. But I know having all those structs is a huge pain too. So I don't know.
maybe we can have a discussion about it, like next tech talk. No, not tech talk, subsync meeting. Sorry.
I think that's the gist.
Oh,
I didn't
yeah.
open it, but yeah. Wait, is that it? No, that's.
I think this
No,
is
it was a
something-
GitHub. That's something else. My fault.
I think I know where you.
That's right. It's a repo. That's right. So I just had like multiple structs versus single structs or whatever, just kind of examples of like, because we're kind of heading down the single struct way, which I think is fine. But I think it does potentially leave us open for, you know, parsing. But right now we parse the TOML multiple places. I think that's the biggest problem I have with what we currently do. Regardless of what we do, I think if we make a nice interface for parsing structs and returning, even if we return a struct, I think that makes sense. Centralize the validation, because right now we can have some ifs that are like deciding logic. And I think that's the main concern I have with the current approach we have. So like, as long as we centralize parsing, I think we can make anything work. But I know right now it's really easy to write the if statement the wrong way and not write a, you know, else to kind of set it to the default correctly. And then you like accidentally get mixed feature sets.
I mean, this is crazy. I haven't thought this through all the way yet. But I'm wondering, like, we want to wrap sort of TOML encoding and decoding in our own encoder decoder that understands more struct annotations. Like, if we could, in the, you know, where we have things that could be like TOML omit empty, like that kind of struct annotation, if we could have Buildpack API version, you could set like min and max and stuff like that, and then we could just add these things on different fields and hope they work. I think
Yeah.
it'd be convenient. I don't know if it makes the best like code interface if people want to be importing lifecycle though, but maybe we could make private versions of stuff that have that and then do something more clever in the interface. I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't quite thought it all the way through yet.
Because there's the JSON serializing stuff or whatever that you can, like, by implementing a method, you can change how it works. And that's really useful if you have a bunch of structs that sort of inherit other structs so that you can control emitting and not emitting certain things. Because yeah, if we ever need to like write out a layer toml, then like I can imagine it being complicated to like make sure that we have the struct set up so that we're not writing values that, you know, an older lifecycle might not understand or something like that. You know, if we wanted to be strict about key value pairs. But yeah, I don't have a strong opinion. This was doing it for my own understanding of like the current options that I understood enough to like play around with.
This is
Multiple
arranging,
structs.
Jesse. Sorry.
Go ahead, Natalie. Sorry.
No, I'm just like, it's amazing that you could just look at the two approaches. Thank you.
Maybe wrong. Yeah, I'd like to see the custom stuff you're talking about, Emily. Like if it's, I wonder how hard it is to write that that behavior that you're talking about. Because could you like embed version numbers in it or something like that, like API version numbers? Like, you know, that'd be kind of interesting so that it would always serializing it to a certain version number would omit it, or reading it would be similar. It would just.
Very intriguing. I'm guessing that we probably won't come to a conclusion today, but maybe we should continue the conversation next time. Does anyone have anything else to add, or should we call it?
Great meeting. I love this 1 hour meeting. I'm getting so much knowledge during this time. So thank you, everyone.